Are you strategic? The answer can make or break your business. Welcome to Strategic Minds, the podcast where we'll do a deep dive in conversations with extraordinary leaders to learn how they think, plan, and act strategically. I'm your host, Rich Horwath, founder of the Strategic Thinking Institute and author of the book Strategic, and my vision is to teach the world to think strategically. Now, let's explore Strategic Minds.
We're stuck.
What do we do? I have no idea.
You need a new strategy.
We need a more dynamic strategy.
The strategy?
You have to strategize.
But you won't strategize.
Let's talk a little strategy.
Welcome to Strategic Minds. Today on the show, I'm excited to speak with Jed Ayres, CEO of ControlUp, a company that helps IT resolve issues faster, prevent tickets, and reduce spending. Jed is widely recognized for the transformational impact he's making on the end-user computing industry. He has more than 20 years of technology experience and has a wide range of industry expertise across workspace management, virtualization, and mobility. Prior to joining ControlUp, he was the CEO at iGel, where he drove the company's successful pivot from a hardware-centric to a software-first company and was instrumental in its acquisition by TA Associates. Jed, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Rich, really wonderful to see you, and thanks for having me.
Excellent. So if we could, let's begin with your origin story. We'd love to hear a little bit about where you grew up and how that environment has really shaped who you are today.
I love that you asked this question because I love origin stories, and as a marketer, always understanding origin is a very rich context. So great first question. I grew up in a small town in Northern California called Mendocino. I was raised by two school teachers, and in a very small artistic community, Mendocino on the North Coast, and so pretty humble middle class upbringing, and kind of put myself through school. Went to school at a state school in Sonoma, beautiful small little school, and that was in the early '90s, and very luckily got sort of connected with technology. I did my MBA at SF State, and kind of put myself through school in the hospitality world, and but got introduced to tech and kind of the beginning of the internet, and it's been a huge gift to me as I've basically stayed in that tech world for the last 30 years.
Wonderful. And I'd be interested, Jed, just as a follow-up, you talked about having two school teachers raise you. You talked about putting yourself through school. So it sounds like education has really been an important aspect of your background. Maybe you could share a little bit about the values that instilled in you as you've developed and grown into a very successful career in technology.
Yeah, well, I think my entire family was in education. I was like the black sheep that didn't go into education. My grandfather was actually the superintendent of schools in San Francisco, and my whole upbringing was surrounded by teachers. And my grandfather told me something very early on in my life that stuck with me, and it was sort of the idea of education. It's something that no one can ever take away from you, and this sort of idea of lifelong learning and sort of humility that comes along with you don't know everything, and you're not the smartest guy in the room, and you can learn a lot by being a listener. And so that was something I grew up with. My dad was also a music teacher, so kind of the more artistic side of the left brain, if you will. And so very lucky to grow up in this small special community surrounded by a lot of artistic people.
Excellent. And just out of curiosity, from an artistic background and having that influence in your formative years, are there any lessons or takeaways from a creativity perspective? I mean, obviously you've got a lot of expertise in the marketing aspect of things as well. Did you notice that any of that creative background has helped shape who you are from a creativity innovation perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one thing I realized early on in tech is that most of the marketing is very boring and very low risk, and so this has been something that I've always thought, like, hey, let's take some risk, right? Like this is no one is this isn't open heart surgery, right? No one's dying here, and so like, how do you stand out? How can you be a little different? And so I certainly try to apply that in terms of just the sort of echo chamber that can be tech marketing, where everything looks the same, and how do you stand out? And so trying to apply some of that creativity to messaging, and also just sort of the creative branding has been something that I think has helped me.
Yes, you mentioned just a moment ago the lifelong learning, and that's something I've seen as I've done research on really extraordinary leaders, that there seems to be a higher level of desire to continue to learn, to continue to gain new knowledge and skills, even when people reach a high level of responsibility like yourself. Any thoughts that you have around your approach to lifelong learning? Any things that you look to do or to bring into your world from a learning perspective as you continue to grow through your career?
I think probably the most important thing as being a CEO is like really being a great listener, and to have your sort of channels of listening equally weighted, right, between employees and partners and customers, right, and sort of like really calibrating your insights that you can gain from rich conversations across each one of those segments. And that's kind of been my philosophy. I learned early on in my career sort of the management by walking around, back when we all used to be in offices and cubicles. And one of my great mentors, he would come out of his corner office and sort of just walk around and strike up conversation. And I think he would learn more in that sort of 15-minute ritual than he would all day staring at spreadsheets in his corner office, right? And so that's something I've carried with me my whole life, is that if you really want to know what's going on, get down and have these conversations, and you're better for.
Excellent. That's a great technique that you shared there. And it is, I think about a CEO's role, a lot of it is being able to adapt to the environment, and not just have an approach that's etched in stone, but be able to read the situation, to understand what's happening. And you just gave us some great insights around the power of listening to customers, to suppliers, to employees, to other folks. Are there any techniques or things that you do to really stay on top of your business situation, how the market's evolving, trends that are happening? Because obviously in your world, it's important to stay relevant, to stay current, and really ahead of the curve on what customers want. So any tips or techniques you can share with our listeners on how you stay on top of the business situation?
Yeah, I think you got to formalize it in a way where you have sort of muscle memory to do this. And so, and all of my former last 3 or 4 companies that I've been at, getting on a quarterly cadence where you have sort of a formal capacity to organize and have a logical dialogue where you're asking a lot of questions and you're listening to all 3 of those populations. We call them think tanks here at ControlUp. I think we call them councils at iGel, my previous company. But you're really leaning in, and these can be pretty extensive conversations, especially once you build the relationships. They can be sort of 3-hour, 4-hour, really well structured conversations where you're asking the hard questions about how their businesses are transitioning, and what are the priorities inside those organizations, and how we can be a better partner to them. And so that has served me very well. Listening, calibrating, trying to prioritize across those sort of 3 populations.
Excellent. I love that idea of the councils, and in that, what you just talked about, those 3 to 4 hour conversations. I think that's something that is a great secret that a lot of people, because they're so busy today, feel like, well, we don't have 3 to 4 hours, or that's going to be taking too much time. But I think the way that you frame that's an opportunity to gain a deeper understanding of the situation, the context, and then understand what the opportunities are. I think that makes a lot of good sense.
Yep. I also would just add to that, Rich. Like, I think one of the important things from a software CEO perspective is really zeroing in on giving yourself access to your customers that you actually win. So as you're winning customers, you're really opening a door up and saying, hey, thanks for buying our product, and I want to have a relationship with you. And then also doing the hard work, which is sometimes forgotten, is when you lose customers, also understanding why did you lose them. Obviously, in the world of ARR, annual recurring revenue, the enemy is churn, right? And so really dissecting where you're losing customers, why they're churning, and this sort of almost equal, you celebrate a win wire, but almost equally important, if not more important, is why are you losing customers, and how can you get in front of those challenges.
Excellent. And Jed, I'd be interested from a CEO perspective, as you work with your people out in the field, how do you get them, or how do you build a culture where they feel comfortable, letting you know that, hey, Jed, we did lose this customer, or we did have churn here? Because obviously, they want to share good news. Like you said, they want to share the wins, and people feel good about the wins. But like you said, sometimes you can learn more from the losses. How do you build a culture internally where people are comfortable talking about the losses, especially to the CEO?
Well, it comes back to sort of core values, I think, and it takes time, right, in any organization to earn trust. But I actually think it starts with a very important core value that I've introduced at the last couple companies I've worked at, which is integrity, right? If you have this concept of sort of integrity and a door that's open to anyone who wants to come, share with you how they see the world and how they can make the company better. And I wake up with the philosophy that every person that got out of bed today and went to work at ControlUp wants to make this a great company and wants to do a great job, and therefore their opinion is valued. My door is open. And so the idea there is that if you have integrity, you can build trust, and if you have trust, you can have a partnership. And in technology, partnerships, whether it's internal with your employees or with your actual partners or with your customers, you can unleash like life-changing innovation. And that's sort of like something that I've am just a huge believer in. And yeah, it starts with kind of this idea of pretty flat, non-hierarchical capacity for good ideas to come from anywhere, feedback to come from all corners of the organization, and yeah, for people to feel comfortable. And that it takes some time for people to actually understand that, because sometimes they come from organizations that are much bigger, where there's just sort of chain of command, and they're not used to the CEO sending them an email or texting with them directly, and that's something they have to get comfortable with. That's my leadership style. I like to sort of make sure everybody feels able to connect with me at any given time.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Jed, you've got a very strong track record of successfully guiding organizations through transformation, and transformation can always be challenging, and you've proven in the past that you've been able to come in and help organizations refocus. I'd be interested if you could share with our listeners a little bit about your approach, as you think back to coming into ControlUp. What do you think about when you're initially developing the strategy and the vision for the group and where you're going to be heading in the future? Any tips, any techniques that you think are important as people are considering developing strategy for a new product, a new service, a new company?
Yeah, well, I guess this is my fourth company to come into where I've worked alongside of a founder. And so that's also a delicate sort of special thing, right? Because you're coming in usually at the favor of a board who wants to see the company go to the next phase, or wants to see some sort of transformation and growth. And so I think the most important thing you got to do is be a great listener again, not just come in and start changing things. It's really the formula I've used very successfully the last couple companies is really doing a rich intersection of the different populations and building a plan. And that plan needs to go 12 months to 36 months, right? Where you're really clear on the milestones on a 90-day basis that you're chasing after, and you get that consensus, which allows for you to sort of visualize that to the whole organization, and then just sort of punch against that list. Now, sometimes the priorities and the plan has to change a little bit, but what I found is having that clarity for the whole organization, like it allows for speed, especially when you're working across time zones with the international kind of team, having kind of laid out like, hey, these are the imperatives, we have to get these things done, and if we do this, we're going to get this result. That's been very helpful to me. I always talk about, obviously the first thing is getting the right people on the bus, and sometimes you do have to make some hard changes. You got to have a great product, so you got to look, and especially in the world of tech, make sure that product is fit for where you're going to take the company, but then having a plan and underpinning the whole thing with the right values and the right culture, which equates to the right passion. I call it the 4 Ps: people, product, plan, passion.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, love those 4 Ps. And I think that's something all of us can take a look at and go through those 4 Ps for our business. And I think that'd be a great exercise for everybody listening out there to look at those 4 Ps for your organization. And as Jed talks about, do you have clarity on those things? And is that clarity consistent across the leadership team? You talked, Jed, just a moment ago about, being able to have the plan, underpin it with the values, and it gives everybody that momentum moving forward. If you could share with me a little bit about some of the challenges that you see as CEO. I mean, sometimes when we're working with a team, we've got to reallocate resources. So let's say, product X is underperforming, product Y is performing really well. We need to move resources. How do you and your team like to approach that process of reallocating resources? You talked earlier about, looking at things quarterly. How do you look at potentially moving resources, people, time, budget from one area to the next?
Yeah, well, I was very lucky to work for an incredible operator in my last company. I learned a ton working with them, and one of the foundational things is you got to have a leadership team that's just locked arms around that plan and is inspecting the business every week, end to end. And I think that's very important. And then we get together face to face at the end of every quarter as well, and do a deep 3-day session. But what I would say is part of what tech is all about is it's so fast moving, and that's part of the rich opportunity that you have in tech around disruption and speed, especially in the size companies that I've been able to work in, the sort of 100 million to 500 million size. You can actually move pretty quickly, right? And so what I found is, having a full inspection of the business from one end to the other with all the different functional leadership in a meeting once a week has been very helpful, because you can call those audibles on the plan, everybody stays aligned, and you do have to make tough choices at times. It's the innovator's dilemma that's almost on display every week, every quarter, in terms of, how do you put the right people in the right places, right? And with AI bearing down on us, we're even seeing a bigger opportunity for disruption, right? And so, you have to not be afraid, I think, to make these tough decisions. And it's part of the challenge of a lot of sleepless nights. I think my partner, the founder, we commiserate that we now have, a partner and being equally sleepless at night, right? Worried about these things, but it's part of the joy of it all, honestly.
Yes. You mentioned innovation a couple times, and I'd love to get your perspective. As we think about innovation, sometimes it's described as creating new value, and oftentimes innovation at the core is an insight, and I define an insight as a learning that leads to new value. You've obviously been at the forefront of innovation in the companies that you've worked with. What's your approach to innovation, to generating insights, to being able to come up with new ideas that really do create new value? You talked in the opening about differentiation, creating unique value. What's your approach to innovation and the idea of coming up with insights?
So I kind of segment this into typically 2 different categories, Rich. I think what we talked about earlier around getting good input from partners and customers can really help you incrementally improve product, typically, right? Where you're fixing the little nits and gnats, and occasionally you're adding something that's functionally better. But what I found in my career is that the sort of real disruptive innovation typically is really comes from within. It comes from really creative people that are able to have the sort of wingspan to get into a dark room and think differently, and they feel like they're in a safe place to kind of come up with new ideas that are radical. And that's been my experience. I mean, I think every organization may have different versions of this. We just came out with a security product that no one had seen before in our category around digital employee experience, and adding that in, and that came from one of our labs, right? Like that came from a guy who had the ability. He didn't even come into our own office in Israel on a regular basis. He was sort of almost detached, but he was able to sort of think differently and then figure out how to bring something to market in a very short period of time. And I think, I have to say, having been the CEO of an Israeli company for the last year, this is something that is part of their, rich innovation history, is the sort of speed. Mm-hmm. And I think that comes from the sort of fearless, capacity to kind of iterate on concepts that, probably aren't being, thought about by customers, right, per se. Or if they are, they're almost like just total dreams from customers that they are able to like go try to figure out how to actually make a reality.
Yeah, that's a great description. I've read about Henry Ford saying, if we asked people if they wanted, what they wanted, they'd say faster horses. They wouldn't think of cars. And Steve Jobs, the same thing. He's talked about that too. So it's interesting. I love that story that you just shared about, being able to disrupt innovatively really is going to come internally versus customers. You talked obviously about the importance of listening to customers to get ideas of trends and patterns, but really understanding that the true responsibility for disruptive innovation is going to come internally. I'd be interested, Jed, how do you as a CEO look at these opportunities to innovate and determine, which one should we bet on? Because, initially when we have new ideas, they seem great, but we can't follow all of them. And sometimes people get distracted and they're following too many ideas. Is there anything that as the CEO you use to help you determine, which ideas we should potentially invest in and pursue, and then which ideas we should decide not to pursue?
Honestly, this is, I think we're probably one of the greatest gifts of any CEO, right? And it comes down to a little bit of gut, right? I mean, obviously we live in a data-driven world where you can do a certain amount of research on, what you think the actual outcome could be, right? And obviously there's a lot of different ways to derive that, the impact of incredible innovation, right? And what it might be. And it's funny that you asked this question, Rich, because ControlUp is in a new category that's framed by Gartner as digital employee experience, right? And it's like this sort of platform of tools. And when you look across it, it's like sort of almost everything you could ever imagine that has ever been built to manage, secure, and patch Windows and beyond, right? Applications and devices that go even into MacBooks and Chromebooks and browser-based applications and Windows-based applications. So I'm faced with this on a daily basis, right? At the end of the day, the customer voice is pretty loud, right? And especially as you climb into these large enterprise customers and you see which things are going to give them the fastest ROI. I do think that's part of when you think about the truly disruptive companies, they're the ones like VMware that could walk in and say, hey, you have 100 servers, let me show you how I can make it 10. And then that just sort of is so financially accretive that it's like you go on this sort of meteoric rise. So I think, from my perspective, when I think about adding innovation and the cost that it takes to, launch a product and maintain it and do all the things from end to end around a product, you really want to make sure that you have customers are actually going to be able to justify buying it, right? And that it kind of pays for itself. I think that's probably one of the most important things in today's day and age, right? Where you have a noisy market and really good competitors. You want to be able to walk in and say, I have something different, and you're going to be able to purchase this, and it's going to pay for itself. In tech, I think that tends to be one of the most the easiest things, right? When you have sort of squishy ROI, it's much harder to get a team of people, which is what we're faced with today in terms of how big decisions are made, right? It's not one guy writing a check, it's a team of people. And so, yeah, you got to have great tech, but you need to make sure that the actual return is there.
And Jed, you've got a really unique background with a lot of expertise in hospitality and marketing technology. And what you just said there, I'd love to dive a little deeper there. You talked about, being able to explain the ROI, being able to paint that picture for folks. If you wouldn't mind, share with us a little bit about your approach to being able to, as the CEO, communicate that vision, and what role does storytelling in your mind play in being able to win over a market with a good differentiated product?
I think it's almost the most important thing, honestly, Rich, right? When you think about humans and how they're wired for thousands of years, right? To sort of sit around a fire, look into the whites of each other's eyes and tell stories, right? And pass those stories on through generations. It's like, I think, people will say there's two things that, on your deathbed, you're going to remember, right? It's stories and how people made you feel. Those are the two emotions that drive people, right? And that I think you have to think about as you are running a company also, right? It's really a very important thing. And I was lucky in my, probably 15 years ago, I was fortunate enough to have a mentor and a friend and actually a vendor that I worked with that sort of just believed like, hey, all this PowerPoint goop, throw it away. When you stand in front of your employees and your customers, get in front of them and just tell them stories. And that's what they're going to remember. They're not going to remember some, PowerPoint with 1,000 words on it, right? And so I've very much adopted this as a leader, as a strategy, right? Is like, what are the stories you're going to tell? And, you need to have a carousel, I think, as a leader of stories that, cross through values, culture, obviously the technology that you're selling. You want to stand in front of a hospital and get them to buy your product. You better be able to tell them a story about another hospital that, is using it and how they're gaining benefit from it, right? And so actually it's something that I've done in all my past companies is sort of like dinner with the CEO kind of thing, right? Where I have the benefit of being able to sort of travel the world and listen to all these customer stories. And I like to synthesize them into kind of short little sound bites, right? But it's like, hey, if you're, with a customer in retail, here's 5 stories that you can tell them that they'll probably remember much more than some, elevator pitch. And so, yeah, I'm a firm believer in story is the route to all greatness in the world, right? You think about some of the greatest tech companies, they had leaders that were great storytellers.
Yeah, Jed, that is a really, really useful technique you just shared with us, that idea of a carousel of stories and then, transforming those into sound bites that you can share with other customers, other prospects that are in the same world. So I think that's a really powerful point that you bring up, the idea that it's not just strategy, but you have to have a story around that that's going to help convey, to implement the strategy and what folks are trying to do there. So I love that idea.
Yeah. Well, and I think as a leader, you need to humanize yourself, and there's no faster way to humanize yourself than to actually tell stories. And that's one thing that's always been an important part of like kickoffs that I've done as you form a leadership team and you get them in front of hundreds of employees is like, let's learn a little bit about your origin story, right? Like what you shared when I started, right? Like what makes rich.
Yeah, that's a great idea too. I didn't even think about that. Not only with customers externally, but internally, getting your team to talk about their story, like you said, their origin story, and to have that as a practice within the organization, I think definitely is why you've been able to build such great cultures at the places that you've been.
You also, when you talk about core values, right, it's like, okay, it's one thing for it to be in an onboarding or on a wall somewhere, but it's also like, hey, are you celebrating it in your town halls? Are you talking about those values? Are you sharing, clear stories where those values were drivers, right, and where they were lifted up and clear to everybody and helped a good outcome. So I think, yeah, you have to find a way to kind of live that, and through story is probably the richest way.
Yeah. And just to build on that, Jed, any other leadership principles? I mean, it sounds obviously like, you've done a really nice job building the culture with, creating those values you've talked about, using stories both internally and externally. Any other leadership principles that you found effective as you've gone from, your organization to one to the next, and in successfully being a leader and helping people drive towards a vision? Any other principles that you found helpful there?
Well, just like my grandfather took me aside and put his arm around me and told me about education. When I graduated from high school, he gave me a card, and I think it had a $20 check in it, and it was on the front of it. It had a quote from Henry David Thoreau that said, if one advances confidently in the direction which they imagine, they will meet success in uncommon hours. And for me, I actually was like, wow, that was a profound statement for a 18-year-old kid. And I think I put that in a frame, and I still have it on my desk. And so part of one of my leadership principles is, you want to build a $1 billion value company, you got to be able to visualize that, right? That is possible. And so when I took over as a CEO, I can remember, basically standing up and telling the team, like, there's two things, that are going to drive me. One is this idea that, if you can visualize something in your mind's eye, and you can put the right plan underneath of it, nothing's impossible, right? And so you need to open your mind to this, right? Because this is a freeing kind of exercise. You either think you can do something, or you think you can't. Either way, you're right. And so I guess I've always been a believer that you need to start with visualizing it. Obviously, you need to do the right operational work to get there, but having the ability to sort of dream big and do the work, this is important. And then the other side of that is that you have to be able to do it in a way that's selfless. It's a theory that I have that sort of is just this, maybe it's counterintuitive in a way, right? That you want to run everyone over on your way to glory. But what I've found is that actually it's the opposite, right? If you sort of disadvantage yourself and you open the door and you kind of help people realize, like, hey, even though this may not serve me today or tomorrow, I'm here to help you, whether it's mentoring you or whatever it is in life. If you can do it in a selfless way, this idea of kind of almost being a servant heart, right? Where if you're doing that with your own employees and colleagues, and by extension your partners, that's going to be very clear to your customers that it's like you're dealing with sort of a different type of an organization that has a more longer term view of partnership. And so that's something that's also served me very well, right? Is this idea of just being selfless and like trying to have empathy for the other people in the world that you're working with, whether it's your own employees, your partners, or your customers. And typically it's actually in that order, right? Like to build a culture inside of your company, you have to exhibit that personality trait with your own colleagues, and then your partners, and then by extension your customers are going to see that.
And to that point, Jed, I love that idea of the selfless leader. Is there anything that you use to trigger that trigger that reminder for yourself, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, or is that something that just is ingrained at this point?
Well, I have on my thing, it's this heart, and it says believe on it. So there's the believe part of it, and the heart is just this idea that you have a servant heart. But that's just a physical reminder, I guess.
Yes.
That is on my desk. But I think it's you have to kind of learn this behavior, because it's in a world of selfies and me. It's like, you have to sort of take a deep breath sometimes and realize that everyone in the world is going through something, and you have to put in the back of your in the front of your mind that, hey, this person is trying to do the right thing, and give them the benefit of the doubt, right? And so that's been my strategy. And sometimes there are partnerships or customers that just, it's not going to work out, or employees, the same thing. But, you try to lead with this idea that, hey, how can we make this work? And yeah, everyone in the world is going through something, and having high empathy, I think, is important as a leader. And
Yeah,
I found that
absolutely.
you get a lot more out of people that way.
Yeah, and the research supports exactly what you just said. I think a couple years ago was the first time that more Fortune 500 CEOs were let go because of emotional intelligence reasons rather than financial performance. So I think that that physical heart, that token, that symbol is a great way to remember that level of empathy, that servant heart. So I think that's a really excellent technique, and I would encourage people out there listening to find your physical reminder of your values and what you find. Is Jed has just shared with us, some of his leadership principles. I think that's a really powerful thing, to have a physical trigger in your environment that's going to help you remember those things. So I think that's great, Jed. Thank you for sharing that one. One of the things I'd be interested, Jed, you've got a background in hospitality as well. And, when we think about organizations, we typically think about an organization as really a vehicle for creating and delivering value. And I'd love for you to think back on your career, and maybe it's in your personal life, maybe in your professional life, but any moments that you can pick out where you say, wow, that was a truly extraordinary experience. The value level was off the charts. And maybe it was something small, but anything come to mind, either professionally or personally, any experiences that you've had where you said, wow, that was an extra level of value that I hadn't seen before?
I mean, I guess I grew up in a world where I probably wasn't always the smartest guy in the room, but it's always been about hard work for me, and showing up first to the office and putting in the hours has always been the answer. I took a little bit of a detour at one point in my career at the .com bust. I put myself through school. My first job was actually growing up in this little town. I was a dishwasher was my first job, and so during the .com bust, I actually went back home and bought this hotel that was where I got my first job, and it was a total learning experience. The hotel, had fallen into disarray and dysfunction physically and from a business perspective. And so, I spent 4.5 years in a very different role than you would expect to hear from a CEO of a tech company. But it was actually probably one of the healthiest, kind of humbling experiences you could imagine, right? Basically signing up for a huge loan and being thrown into, kind of trying to fix up this old historic building and business. But I was always reminded by this idea that if it was easy, everyone would do it, and that's always been something that has guided me in terms of creating value, is that there are no shortcuts. It really is a lot of hard work. It's a lot of consensus building, team building, getting the right eye on what the prize is, and then it's just a lot of grinding. And I have another saying, which is you just sort of, in the depths of it, sometimes it just seems dark and hard, and what am I doing, up at 3:30 in the morning this morning, driving into San Francisco, going, what, this is on repeat, right? But it's really about finding the next right thing, Rich, is how I look at it. And I believe in the sort of the principle of Peter Drucker, the flywheel, where it's just like, okay, it's amazing when it actually hits, right? You get this sort of flywheel moment where all those little next right things that you do add up, and suddenly you're getting this exponential value out of the next right thing that you're doing. And if you can get everybody in the organization to think that way, and they truly believe it, like that is a powerful thing, because you'll suddenly see it. And I've experienced it just even here at ControlUp, right? Where simple things, just like our pipeline building, have gone like 10x, right, this year, and it's just like, okay, wow, that's a next right thing, right? We just started doing the right things, having the right conversations, putting them into the system in the right way, and suddenly we're at a way best in class coverage ratio in our pipeline. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. It's just a lot of hard work and do the next right thing.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great reminder too, Jed. I think that you just shared there that, sometimes, like you said, we're on repeat. We're up early, we're putting in the hard work, and we may not immediately see the return on that, but you've got to trust, like you said, that flywheel, that if you keep doing the right things, that next right thing, that after a while, that flywheel is going to turn just enough where you're going to get that momentum, and then you're going to start seeing that, like you said, that amazing 10x type of return. So I think that's a good reminder for everybody out there that, keep putting in the hard work, keep looking for the next right thing, keep building your flywheel, making adjustments, and you're going to start to see that extraordinary level of value that you can get. Jed, one of the things I love to do before we close the conversation with our strategic 6 questions is you've proven yourself to be a visionary, to be able to see what's next and then be able to help people execute that. You talked before about, getting people to think about disruptive innovation, to come up with new ideas. I'd be interested, Jed, when you take time individually to think about the business, to think about the plan, to think about where you're going in the next couple of years, what do you do in that individual think time as you're thinking about maybe the vision moving forward? Are there any questions you use, any techniques, any tips that you could share with our listeners for what Jed's thinking strategically actually looks like? Any ways that they could get started doing some of the things that you do?
Well, I think it goes back to sort of visualizing what great looks like. And I like this goes back to our earlier conversation, right? I have another poster behind me here that was in a restaurant I worked at, and I loved it so much because I would walk out the door and see it every day. I go, I'm not going to be a waiter for the rest of my life, because it says to be good is not enough when you dream to being great, right? And so it's like this idea of really visualizing, what does great look like, and what are the steps that I need to take from where I am right now to get to great, right? And so, yeah, this is a thesis when I think about, creating value. It's like, and you're never there, right? That's the beautiful thing, is that you're on a lifelong journey. And so, yeah, I think you just have to kind of close your eyes and take some very deep breaths and think about, what is that possible great outcome in the next 90 days, in the next, 180 days, and you got to sort of incrementally get yourself there. And yeah, you got to bring your team with you, right? Because nothing great is done by a single leader. You got to make sure that not only your leadership knows it, your extended leadership team knows it, and operationally your whole organization understands how they can wake up every day and help make progress. And I think these sort of cascading OKRs and KPIs, so that you're not rooted in, hey, we just need to get to this big ARR target or profitability target. It's like, what can I do in my job as a HR person or a developer or customer experience? What are the metrics that I can push, and how can I improve on those, so that ultimately you're leveling up the overall metrics of the company. So yeah, I think that's something that I haven't perfected it, but it's something that I'm really embarking on here at ControlUp, is to build that sort of company-wide matrix so that everybody understands their ability to build that value, and it's not just some really kind of euphoria metric out there that they're not exactly sure how they connect with it. I'm a new sales development rep that started last week. What can I do to help create that value, right? So you need to be able to, at every function, be clear about that.
Yeah, I love that idea, Jed, because too often I've seen in organizations where leaders, they hand out, and you talked about earlier, they hand out a PowerPoint deck and slides and say, okay, well, go follow this, here's our plan. And you just hit on a really important point, that as a good leader, you've got to walk your people through why you're going where you're going, and then how does it impact what they're doing, so that they actually, use your word earlier, so they can visualize their role in the organization and the creation of that value. So I think that's a really powerful point to talk about the journey and what their role is in the journey. Because like you said, a single leader is not going to be able to do anything on their own. So you've got to bring people with them. So I think that's a really a powerful story to finish with on that analogy of the journey, bringing people along and getting them to see their value. So Jed, I'd be grateful if we could close our conversation today with your response to 6 questions that we call the Strategic 6. So and you might know this one from our earlier conversation, but what was your first job?
Well, actually, before I had my first job that I was given a W-2 for, I was actually worked my summers with my grandfather, who was so influential for me in picking apples in his apple farm in Sonoma County. So 10 cents a bucket and some long, hard days clearing ripe fruit in Sonoma County. And yeah, that was probably my very first job that I can remember getting an actual check at the end of the day and a good meal.
Excellent. It sounds like that might have been the seed of the hard work ethic that you've developed as well.
For sure.
Second question, what's your favorite vacation spot?
That's a good question. I would say, anywhere I can go with my wife and spend some quality time with her. And I love the planet Earth. I think there's so many beautiful places. I probably wouldn't just say one. I just got back from sharing some time with her in Mykonos, which was beautiful. We love Sydney. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, there's so much beauty to see in this planet. I want to continue to see more of it. So I tend to not go back to the same place. Maybe that tells you something about me.
Great. Number 3, what's the one word that best describes you?
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, I'll give you my high school nickname that I had. It was Scrappy. So I think that is sort of, find a way, through any situation and, tenacious. Sometimes, I don't know if your audience is international, but sometimes the word isn't totally understood. I told a story about my nickname in our kickoff in Israel, and they were kind of looking up, the Hebrew version of Scrappy. So, yeah.
Right. Excellent. Number 4, one book has had a significant impact on your development.
I would say I love the book. It was the story of Continental Airlines, right? When they went worst to first. That book, even though it's very short and kind of a simple read, that book also, I would say, has been a huge, for me, where you come into an industry where, you're in the worst position, and how do you get to first? Like, okay, that just kind of transcends a bunch of the things you and I just talked about, Rich.
Yep.
And if you read that book, actually a bunch of the things we talked about are borne out in the CEO who led the sort of transformation of Continental Airlines, which of course now is United.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Number 5, what's the one piece of advice that you'd like to share with others that would fit on a bumper sticker?
I'd probably just put my one word: believe.
Yes, absolutely. That would capture it. Great. And then number 6, what's the most exhilarating moment you've experienced in your professional life?
Wow, that's a great question. Honestly, I have to say the success that we had at iGel, this company that was sort of unheard of in the U.S., was this small, thin, quiet German technology company, right? Building probably the most boring thing that you can think of in tech, a dumb terminal per se, but hidden in this this thin, quiet, dumb terminal was a beautiful, operating system that was super secure and really easy to manage. And we were able to sort of pull that out of that plastic box and build a $100 million software business around it and bring it to the U.S. and build a very profitable company. And so, yeah, I think and then the ability to sell that company to a tier one of the top 5 private equity companies in the world in March of 2021, in the height of COVID, doing that all through the COVID Zoom world that we had to live in. I would say that was probably one of the most exhilarating moments that I ever had, right? Basically taking this company that was losing money, that no one had ever heard of, that was really in northern Germany and going through this incredible transformation, hardware to software, you know, perpetual to subscription, building out a U.S. team, and then the community that came along with that, Rich. You know, we built a huge user base. We built like an event that we would do every year that had attracted thousands of people, right? And so being able to sort of be in the center of that universe was very special. And obviously it's led me to where I am now at ControlUp. But yeah, that was an exhilarating journey for sure.
Wonderful. Well, Jed, thank you very much for the time that you spent with us today. You've shared a lot of great tools and techniques. I've jotted a lot of notes down. There's a lot of things that you shared with us, I think, especially around values, around vision, around the ability to be creative, to tell stories. And I think when we start to bring all of those things together, you've given us a really nice toolkit. So thank you very much for being on the show with us today.
Well, Rich, I think the best thing we can do as we age is to try to give something back, and hopefully I've touched someone in your audience today. And yeah, the only last parting word I would have for everybody that's listening is about your network. I would just tell you, like, I love to connect with people from all walks of life. You never know where those connections will go. So hopefully out of this conversation, I'll build some new friendships and connect with some people. LinkedIn is my favored tool. So yeah, love to connect with you, and I think your network is your net worth.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for all the folks listening out there, we'll certainly put Jed's LinkedIn profile link in the show notes. So please go to the show notes and you can find those there as well. And again, Jed, really appreciate you being on the show today.
Thanks so much.
What are we talking about? Practice?
Practice makes perfect. Practice makes
Profit.
I review 300 to 400 strategic plans a year from CEOs, vice presidents, leaders of marketing, sales, finance, IT, and other areas. The majority of strategies in most plans are offensive in nature, focusing on using their strengths to take advantage of positive opportunities. These offensive strategies are an important part of planning, but the best leaders also develop strategies to neutralize the threats or potentially damaging situations or trends that can impact their business. To practice assessing your threats, you can use a tool I developed called the Threat Matrix. The Threat Matrix evaluates potentially negative external factors such as competitor activities, market trends, etc., using two criteria: probability of occurrence and impact on the business. So if we think about a graph, probability of occurrence is going to be on our vertical or y-axis, and typically we label it 1 to 10. 1 is low, 10 is high. So we want to think about the threats, the negative external events. We want to think about what's the probability that that event's going to occur. 1 being low, 10 being high. Then on the x-axis or the horizontal axis, we're going to have impact to our business. Again, 1 being low, 10 being high. So typically what we do is we take, let's say, competitor contracts creating access barriers to customer. We would first then plot that based on probability of occurrence. So let's say that's a 7, it's fairly high. And the impact on the business, let's say, would be medium, around a 5. So we would plot that almost right in the middle. What's interesting with the threat matrix then is it gives us a way to plot our threats relative to other threats. So if we've got something obviously in the top right corner, high probability of occurrence, high impact on the business, then we're going to potentially want to set strategy to neutralize that threat. So again, as you look at your plan, it's fine to have a lot of offensive strategies that focus on opportunities and strengths, but we also want to think about the threats, the negative situations or trends that could hurt our business, and come up with strategies to do that as well.
I appreciate your strategic mind.
Must have a strategic brain.
Great strategic minds of tomorrow, right here.
In this segment, The League of Strategic Minds, I answer a question submitted by one of our listeners. Today's question: what is competitive advantage? Competitive advantage is providing superior value to customers. It's comprised of 3 factors: capabilities, activities, and offerings. Capabilities are the assets, skills, and resources you possess, what you have. Activities are the basic units of competitive advantage because they're where capabilities merge with resource allocation into the actions you take. So activities are what you do. And offerings are the products and services that customers interact with, what you provide. It's helpful to regularly analyze your business and key competitors on these three areas: capabilities, what you have; activities, what you do; and offerings, what you provide. That helps you then determine who has competitive advantage and why. If you have a question you'd like answered, visit the Strategic Minds page on the website strategyskills.com and complete the brief submission form. If your question's selected, you'll receive some Strategic Minds swag for your contribution.
Any insights?
You play to win the game.
Any further insights?
You don't play to just play it.
Insightful.
I want winners.
I played the game to win.
I want people that want to win.
It's very insightful.
Our Winsight, or idea for advantage today, comes from Winston Churchill, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He said, "To each there comes in their lifetime a special moment when they are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do a very special thing, unique to them and fitted to their talents. What a tragedy if that moment finds them unprepared or unqualified for that which could have been their finest hour." The question I'll leave you with today: are you continuing to develop your expertise and skills to be your best so you too can realize your finest hour? If your team needs a new process and tools for strategic thinking, lacks a common language for strategy, is too reactive and tactical, or would like to increase innovation to grow profits and create competitive advantage, visit strategyskills.com, where you can learn more about strategy workshops, online certificate courses, the Strategic Thinker newsletter, and hundreds of other resources. Pick up a copy of my newly released book, Strategic, and take your leadership development to the next level by subscribing to the Strategic Fitness System, an innovative, state-of-the-art executive development platform. Remember, be strategic to be your best.